It's a good morning to you. Welcome to Asake Online. My name is Zenzele Ndebele, and this is the Breakfast Club, a show where we talk everything political, social, and economic. It's our current affairs show, so you get the pulse of the town, but also the pulse of the country, what is going on. Just last week, it was trade fair, so it was pegged. All the guys from Harare, came to the trade fair. This is the only time when you see so many big cars in the city of kings. Every bar was pegged, every restaurant was pegged. They even brought a cow. When I talk about a cow, I'm talking about the 5G mobile transmitter or substation. And at the internet, if you visited the trade fair, there was 5G internet. It was quite, nice. And I wish it was trade fair every week, because our roads get to be fixed. The lights around the trade fair gets to be sorted. And at least our people get a bit of business. Anyway, I'm not being political about trade fair, but those are the economic opportunities that come once in a year. And maybe the mine intra brings a bit of this and that. So in our program today will be diplomatic. We are talking to diplomats, and we are lucky to be talking to the American Chargé d'Affaires. It sounds French, Chargé d'Affaires. I hope I get that right.
You've got it right, Zenzele.
And I'll be talking to Elaine French. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Zenzele, for inviting me. Yeah. Appreciate it.
Maybe my first question to you is that you went to the trade fair. What's the experience? How was it like?
Well, the experience has been great. It's the second year in quite a while that the United States has had a booth at the trade fair. And we're there to showcase our programs, our assistance, and our exchanges with Zimbabwe's youth. We're there to kind of explain a lot of our policies and explain why we're here in Zimbabwe and how committed we are to the Zimbabwe people. But it's got quite a buzz at the moment, so I hope many of your listeners had an opportunity to go through and visit us at the trade fair.
Yeah, I passed by the stand. It was quite busy. Yeah. A lot of nice areas to take photographs. But for me, I'm interested in the history between Zimbabwe and the US. Has always been, the relations have been always complex, if I may use the word. But I would say currently, how would you describe the relations between the two countries?
Well, Zenzele, when I think back to being at the trade fair last year versus being here again in Bulawayo this year, having the opportunity to be here, a lot has happened over the last year. A lot has happened for Zimbabwe and between the US and Zimbabwe. First, looking back to August last year, we had presidential elections here in Zimbabwe. Last month, President Joe Biden announced a transition in our sanctions program. And then most recently, President Mnangagwa declared a drought emergency in the country, along with other countries in the region. So there's actually a lot has happened over the last year, but quite honestly, our policy has not changed when it comes to U.S. policy to Zimbabwe. We continue to urge the government to take concrete, key steps in terms of open, accountable, and democratic governance. We continue to urge them to tackle corruption issues in the country so that all Zimbabweans can prosper in Zimbabwe. And we are focused on that issue of prosperity in general for the people of Zimbabwe. This year again, the United States has committed an additional $209 million to support the government and Zimbabwe's response to the HIV epidemic. In January, we committed $11 million to support 230,000 of the most vulnerable in the country that are facing this drought and living through lean season and helping them bridge the gap between their harvests. And this year, like many recent years, we have 100 Zimbabweans that are taking part in exchange programs in the United States. And those are programs that range from high school to mid-career professionals. So it's the reason why we're here, really. It's the reason why we're in the Zimbabwe International Trade Fair, to highlight and showcase our commitment to the Zimbabwe people.
Yeah, one would ask that we've talked about the relations and said your policy has not really changed, and you urge Zimbabwe to look at issues like corruption, like the human rights. What would you say are the biggest challenges and opportunities when you're looking at improving the U.S. relations?
Sure. I think in terms of our relationship with the government, one of the areas where we have worked very closely is in the African Development Bank facilitated dialogue. That dialogue began in December of 2022, and we have stayed committed to engaging in that dialogue since the beginning. We've engaged in good faith. We've worked with other partners and stakeholders to ensure that key economic governance and land reforms are kind of highlighted. And we think it's probably the best opportunity for the government to kind of take on those key reforms. But I will highlight that the United States paused our participation in that dialogue a few months ago based on the outcomes of the August presidential elections. We felt they fell short of regional and international standards. And so we're looking to the government and others who have called for an interim assessment for that to be completed so we can kind of assess where we go from here and what reforms are the next steps for the government so that we can come back to the dialogue and really work with partners in the government to make real progress on economic land and governance reforms that are necessary for the future prosperity of this country.
Yeah, in March, the United States of America imposed a new set of sanctions, which is more like a transition from the sanctions that have been there. But 8 individuals, including President Mnangagwa and his wife, and other officials were put on these sanctions on allegations of corruption, human rights abuses. Do you believe the new set of sanctions are going to improve or promote democracy and accountability in Zimbabwe?
Yes, I do. In March 4th, President Joe Biden announced the termination of the Zimbabwe sanctions program. And as you mentioned, designated 11 individuals and 3 companies on the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act sanctions program. And I think this change, this transition is a real opportunity for government to show their commitment to key reforms on human rights, on rule of law, on corruption issues, on good governance. And it's also an opening for business. I think it's an opening for business to kind of take another look at Zimbabwe. These sanctions are refined. They're more focused. They target individuals and companies that are involved in serious corruption and gross human rights violations. But I think what is key about these sanctions is they are a global program. They are not Zimbabwe specific. There are over 40 countries on the Global Magnitsky sanctions list. Over 700 individuals. Many of those individuals are in countries that we do lots of trade and investment with. Some might be surprised that there are individuals from South Africa on that list. Some might be even more surprised that there are individuals from Mexico on that list. Mexico is one of the largest trading partners with the United States and a very close ally. But I think what's key is, and I want your listeners and viewers to understand, is sanctions are only one part of our approach when it comes to our foreign policy with Zimbabwe. As we've already highlighted a bit, we do quite a bit in terms of programs, exchanges, and our commitment to the Zimbabwe people. And if you look at what we do in terms of development, in terms of diplomacy, and see our engagement across the board, I think you recognize that we are a steadfast and committed partner to the people of this country.
What is you touched on the issue of, that some of the people who are, or individuals who are coming from countries that you trade with, but they are on sanctions. And my next question would be, what is the U.S. view when it comes to Zimbabwe's recent or the economic, reforms, including the new currency that has been announced?
It's hard to have a big opinion yet. It just got announced. And we're really eager to kind of see what this announcement, what this change will really bring in terms of kind of greater macroeconomic stability. We know greater economic stability is important for attracting more investment and more trade with Zimbabwe. And it will help with, that sort of stability is going to help with economic growth. I understand that, in some ways that a market-driven and competitive kind of currency rate is very important for Zimbabwe, and it's something that the IMF has recommended in the past. But I think we're going to have to wait and see how the implementation of this currency kind of rolls out over the next few weeks. And really, we're waiting to see when the IMF comes out to do their next assessment, what their take is on where this currency kind of stands and how it is contributing to macroeconomic stability in the country.
The Second Republic, as it's called, as mantra, has always been Zimbabwe is open for business. And what steps can be taken by the US government to encourage American business people to come and invest in Zimbabwe?
Well, we welcome the opportunity for increased bilateral trade and investment with Zimbabwe, but it's going to require some key reforms. We have a lot of work to do. But I think what's key is, when we look at the foreign direct investment from the United States in Zimbabwe, in 2022, that stood at $238 million in terms of FDI. That is not insignificant. That's a pretty large sum of money. But that FDI does fall short of foreign direct investment from the United States going into many of Zimbabwe's neighbors, and falls short of foreign direct investment that was coming into Zimbabwe in the past. So I think there's definitely more we can do. We're working with our Department of Commerce to engage business and investors in the United States, to educate them on the opportunities in Zimbabwe. We are promoting matchmaking programs that kind of links up and matches U.S. business with Zimbabwe business here. And we also do company promotions with the Department of Commerce. Last month, we hosted a U.S. company interested in new technologies that, was interested in the Zimbabwe market. We also collaborate and work with the American Chamber of Commerce here in Zimbabwe. The AmJam was launched just over a year ago. It is private sector led with a number of companies that have interests or connections with the United States. So working with them, we are looking to do more coordination and collaboration between U.S. business and Zimbabwe business. It is, at the end of the day, up to the government of Zimbabwe, though, to adopt crucial and key economic reforms to really attract that U.S. business and U.S. investment into the country.
This week, the State Department released a country report on Zimbabwe, which highlighted quite a number of, human rights abuses, and it's one concern that the US has always highlighted. What can the Zimbabwean government do to address some of these issues that have been raised?
The United States, the State Department puts out a human rights report every year on every country around the world. I think they are important reports for the government and for civil society to review. But honestly, we remain very concerned about the state of human rights in the country. For those that are interested, I think it's important for them to kind of point them at not just the human rights report, but the Department of Treasury designations on March 4th under the Global Magnitsky Human Rights Accountability Act program. In that statement by the Department of Treasury, they lay out specifically why certain individuals are being designated under serious human rights violations. And in particular, they lay out the fact that the government has used ferret teams to target and attack members of the population, to abduct, beat, and torture opposition supporters as well as opposition members. And we feel that is unacceptable. Impunity is a problem. And when you fail to investigate or hold individuals accountable who abduct, torture, even kill an individual, to us, that's a serious concern in terms of the human rights of a country. We're going to continue, the United States, the U.S. Embassy is going to continue to work with civil society. We're going to continue to work with members of the diplomatic corps, with partners around the country, as well as parts of government that share those concerns here in Zimbabwe. And we're going to hold individuals accountable that we feel are engaged in human rights violations, and utilize the tools at our disposal, in the United States.
In a democracy, press freedom plays a very big role in holding those office bearers accountable, but also educating, the citizens when it comes to elections and making decisions. What do you think needs to be done to improve press freedom in Zimbabwe?
Well, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, freedom of media are absolutely imperative in any democracy. And those are freedoms that are protected in both the US Constitution and in the Zimbabwe Constitution. So it is not just the United States supporting or promoting their ideals. These are freedoms actually ingrained in Zimbabwe's own constitution. And I feel very strongly that journalists who are just trying to do their jobs shouldn't be persecuted by the government or others. They shouldn't have to self-censor. They shouldn't be targeted for just carrying out their jobs. It's the role and the responsibility of media and journalists to hold officials accountable for their actions. A free and independent media should strengthen a democracy, not weaken a democracy. The United States Embassy here in Harare is engaged in supporting journalists and media freedom in Zimbabwe. Last year, we sent 3 journalists to the United States to learn about media freedom and cover new technologies. This year, we are sending 2 journalists to the United States to cover the US elections in November. And in the lead up to the elections in November, we're actually hosting a number of different roundtables and discussions to talk about the role of media in covering elections and covering elections in a democracy, because we think that's really important, and it's a value that we will continue to support and defend.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about human rights and business and so on, but Zimbabwe is facing a drought this year, like many other countries in the region, and we've heard the president saying the country needs about 2.2 billion. Are there any plans by the US government to assist during this time?
Well, I highlighted a little bit, Zenzele, at the outset. In January, the United States committed an additional $11 million to the World Food Program and lean season assistance. And as I mentioned, that will support 230,000 individuals during the most difficult time of the year. In addition to that, the United States over the last 5 years has provided approximately $115 million in agriculture and food security. We know the El Nino drought is affecting a number of countries in the region. And with Zimbabwe's own declaration, we have kind of sent that appeal back to Washington. And we're looking at the region as a whole in terms of how we can respond and assist all of the countries in Southern Africa that are being affected by this drought. But just to talk a little bit more about some of the specific programs we have that are ongoing, the United States, in particular through our U.S. Agency for International Development, has a number of programs. One is on diversifying livelihoods, working with farmers to not just focus on one crop or one harvest, but try to build up more resilience with certain farmers throughout the country. We're also focused on trying to help introduce stress-tolerant seeds, as well as doing work in water management. In the last few years, the United States has provided assistance to build or repair 2,600 dams and irrigation systems around the country. And last year, through the U.S. Agency for International Development's Feed the Future program, we provided loans, equipment, and seeds to 35,000 small-scale farmers around the country. And those farmers were able to turn a profit of $26 million. So we know that with the current emergency, there's a need for immediate assistance. But I think a lot of what we're doing in terms of kind of the agricultural and economic growth spheres of our programs is trying to build up that resilience in terms of being able to kind of ensure that farmers can survive during these difficult seasons and these difficult years, and that it doesn't kind of undermine the prosperity of the country.
Yeah, maybe lastly, I know over the years, the US Embassy and the American government has supported a lot of programs around HIV and AIDS. In your assessment, do you think this support has helped to reduce the numbers and the cases of HIV?
Absolutely. I feel very strongly about this. I think, millions are living longer, healthier lives in Zimbabwe because of support from the United States. As I mentioned, this year, again, we're providing $209 million in PEPFAR support to work with the government and the Ministry of Health in responding to the HIV epidemic. The United States has been the largest donor, bilateral donor in Zimbabwe since independence, and we've provided nearly $5 billion to the people of Zimbabwe over the last 44 years. 93% of individuals in Zimbabwe on antiretroviral therapy have achieved viral load suppression, which enables them to live healthy lives. More than 21,000 healthcare workers receive their salaries through our PEPFAR program. Over the last 3 years, some might think our assistance has been declining, but actually we've provided approximately $1 billion in assistance over the last 3 years, and the vast majority of that in the health sector. At independence in 1980, the United States committed to helping Zimbabwe rebuild their health sector, much of which had been destroyed during the liberation struggle. And at that time, we committed $2 million. But our commitment to the Zimbabwe people has continued for the last 4 decades plus, and that $2 million has kind of translated into nearly $5 billion in those 44 years, with the vast majority of it going to the health sector.
I think on that positive note, I would like to thank you for...
I'll end by giving you some information that we're handing out at ZITF this week, a little bit more information about our programs and our exchanges and what we've committed to in terms of the people of Zimbabwe.
Thank you very much for visiting us and getting this opportunity to talk to you about some of the quite important issues that involve the Zimbabwean and American relations, because there is always, the cat and mouse game.
Well, I'm always happy to be here, Zenzele. Thank you so much for inviting me. Happy to come back at another point when I'm back in Bulawayo as well.
Yeah, I think that was quite an informative program. I think $5 billion in 44 years, and I think $1 billion in the last 3 years. So surely Zimbabwe is open for business in other ways, but we still have the concerns. Like she has said, the American government still have the concerns around corruption, like human rights abuses, and as Zimbabweans, as myself, we also have those concerns that the government of Zimbabwe could be better placed to do other things and to attract more investment if it respected the rule of law, and if corruption was not a big issue, if the natural resources that are found around our communities benefit the people, but most of the times what we get is eviction, the pits that our cattle fall in, and the gold is gone somewhere where we don't know. My name is Zenzele Ndebele. Let's meet again in other programs.